Welcome everybody to this expert talk. Today we're going to talk about breaking down the use of platform services in Azure. My name is Dwayne Natwick. I will be the instructor for this expert talk, and I am an author, trainer, and product manager that's been in the industry for over 30 years. I am a senior cloud training architect at Opsagility, and currently have multiple Azure and Microsoft 365 role-based certifications, along with my CISSP and PMP. I am a Microsoft certified trainer and a regional lead for the program, and you can find me active on social media and email on the links on this slide. So what are we going to talk about today? Today we are going to discuss in this expert talk the differences in the platform services and to other cloud services within the Azure environment. And what I hope to accomplish for anyone listening to this expert talk is that you will understand better understand the terminology that goes along with platform services, what the various platform services within Azure are, and how to get started with those various services, and then discuss the advantages and benefits of platform services and how you take those next steps in utilizing those services and leveraging the capabilities of them, as well as securing those environments. So let's get started with doing a comparison of the various cloud services and where platform services align. So where I want to start here is just kind of go through the acronyms that platform services fall in the different cloud services. And as information technology people, we tend to get in the bad habit of using acronyms rather than words. So let's provide some definition around the three main cloud services. There are the IaaS services, which are the infrastructure as a service, which typically handle when we're talking about those type of services, we're talking about virtual machines within the Azure environment. We're talking about very typical to what you would have in terms of your own data center environment with servers and virtual machines running on a VMware platform and things like that. Then we have on the other end of the spectrum, the SaaS services, which are the software as a service, which if anybody is utilizing Microsoft and Office 365 services, Google's G Suite of services, those are, Salesforce, those are all anything that you're accessing and have the ability to access through logging in through a web console. Those are those SaaS-based services, and we'll talk a little bit more about how those are defined from a service level in a minute. And then platform services, or PaaS, becomes a little bit harder to grasp because they kind of fall in between the IaaS services and the SaaS services in what they provide. And the goal in this expert talk is that at the end of this presentation, you'll have a much stronger grasp in what those platform services are. So as an organization begins to take their journey into cloud services, the level of responsibility for security and infrastructure control changes. And where in your own data centers, the responsibility relies solely on your organization for all of these services, from physical all the way up to information and data. As you move to more cloud services and cloud native applications, the amount of infrastructure responsibility becomes less and less. And you can see here as we move across with infrastructure services, you have full responsibility from the operating system up to your application, your information, your data, where cloud providers such as Microsoft Azure are providing all of the physical environment for you. They're providing all of those, all of that physical infrastructure. And then as you move into the SaaS services, they're providing you everything all the way up to providing the application. Like I said, you're not with like Microsoft 365. You don't have to do anything with that application. All you have to do is put your users in and set your parameters for how data is being shared and things like that. So there's a lot more control there from that standpoint, but Microsoft controls everything from the application down, from how that's configured, how that's secured, and what's being done. The gray area for SaaS services is that identity and directory infrastructure and how you're handling your users and groups within there. Microsoft provides you with the tools to do that, but those need to be configured on your, as a consumer, you have to configure those controls. And then platform services falls right in the middle there. We'll talk a little bit more how that's defined in the next slides. So when you note with platform services that it's fairly well balanced in terms of the customer and cloud provider, in this case Azure's responsibilities. But here in the middle lies this gray area, and we're going to talk through each of these areas here in the next few slides. So you can note that in contrast to infrastructure services, where the cloud provider is only handling the physical hardware, the physical data center, the physical network pieces to it, with platform services, you go up a layer where they are also handling all of the operating system changes, all of the updates and the requirements for that part of the infrastructure as well, which is extremely helpful from a development and management standpoint, since you no longer are required to ensure that the operating systems are properly patched, all security updates are done, and it removes a level of management burden on your organization to allow them to focus more on the application rather than the host server and the host compute resources that are going to be running that application. And a key point to note here is across all of the cloud services, you as the customer of the organization are always responsible for the information and data, the management of devices, the protection of your data, and how you configure your identity and directory infrastructure. With IaaS, you in a way have sole responsibility on it. With platform and SaaS services, the controls are in place and the configuration is really the big need and the big requirement that is needed from your standpoint. And since the management and the infrastructure and the operating systems are no longer a management and security control of yours, the monitoring and management, managing the controls of these areas become increasingly important to protect your users and data and the unnecessary exposure to bad actors. So making sure that you have your identities and your roles properly set to the principles of least privilege, and how you are securing and encrypting your data and protecting your keys become much more important. We'll talk much more about security later on in this presentation. Then as we fall into the middle of this gray area here, as I've hit on a little bit already, this gray area is a shared responsibility in a way. And the reason for that is that Azure provides the guidance and controls for networks and applications and identity and directory infrastructure within the Azure environment, but it's really your your responsibility to turn on a lot of those controls and configure those for your necessary needs. And then Microsoft Azure also has a lot of monitoring tools in there that you can also handle and utilize on the back end as well. So that's why that becomes like a gray area of responsibility, because if you've turned on or subscribed to those services within Azure, it becomes more, there's an availability responsibility and service level agreement that Microsoft needs to adhere to, that those controls will be available to you. But it is your responsibility to monitor the actions that are happening within that environment and make sure that you're taking care, and you're turning the right services on to protect those areas within your environment. And to bring together the last few slides and what we've been talking about, this kind of, I like this diagram from a way, if you're not familiar with the different levels of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. This brings it together in a way that everybody can relate to, and that's pizza as a service. Most people eat pizza and they consume pizza in multiple ways, and you can utilize this type of diagram to think about how platform services fall in there. And platform services are very similar to a pizza delivery, where you're providing the place to dine and the soda that you're going to be drinking or whatever beverage of your choice is, but everything else is being handed to you ready to go and ready to consume. And that's how platform services work within the Azure environment. All the compute resources and everything's ready to go for you, and it's just you that needs to provide the yourself and the means to consume that, and how you want to consume that within your own environment. So as we go into understanding the terminology of platform services a little bit more, I like to use Dilbert tends to come across with a lot of great ways to summarize how many of us in the technology field feel about different things. And they've got a couple great comics around platforms, and you can see here, big platform services are becoming, and PaaS services are becoming much more of a buzzword out there. And you can see here, you've got a consultant that's just blah blah blah, and management's not understanding what they're saying until they say platform. Oh wow, platforms are where we want to go. So we're going to talk more about how to understand and know what platform services are and what they are within the Azure environment in the next few slides. So the easiest way to break down platform services is that they are managed compute. Even though when we think about PaaS, and we're thinking about we no longer are dealing with the operating system, and we're no longer maintaining the physical infrastructure, the components are all still there and working in the background. And if you can take that thought in your mind, then platform services don't become so difficult to grasp and understand as a concept. They provide the ability in Azure to, Azure builds these platforms to allow them to be deployed and consumed quickly by an organization, allowing you to focus on application development. And many of these services, because Microsoft and Azure are the ones that are in charge and managing the operating system level down to the physical level, they have a lot higher level service level agreements, or SLAs, because they are built with scalability and automated backups for business continuity. So there's a higher level of availability with much of them than you would get in terms of an infrastructure as a service type environment when you're building your own virtual machines. So that's a very key benefit to utilizing platform services. And here's a list of really the primary services that Azure provides with that fall within that PaaS category. And some of the key ones that we talk about on a regular basis and consume and utilize on a regular basis are, Azure Kubernetes services, which fall into the whole container instances environment, cognitive services, and then also consuming database services such as Azure SQL within the environment. We're going to talk deeper on a few of these popular services as we go through this presentation deeper. So hopefully everybody to this point has gotten an idea and a grasp on platform services and how they differ from a typical data center, typical infrastructure as a service, and what they are. And the key point to it is that they are still compute resources. They're still virtual machines in essence running in the background, but they no longer have the management responsibility of what you would do in terms of in terms of if you're standing up a typical virtual machine within the Azure environment or within your own data center. So it's absolving you to a degree of those management responsibilities and that management overhead, and providing you with a highly available, highly scalable resource of compute services that you can easily consume to create and run your applications. So let's talk now about more around the benefits to utilizing these services from a deeper standpoint. But one of the key benefits here for most platform services is that they do utilize a consumption-based subscription model, which is a great way to get started. In contrast to infrastructure as a service type model, where you are turning on a virtual machine and you have you're consuming the runtime of that server, regardless of whether you're actually using it or you're it could be that nobody's accessing that application, but you're still paying for it. When you're having a consumption-based service, you are now only paying for the amount of times that you are accessing those compute resources and utilizing those compute resources. So if you're developing a new application, the amount of traffic that it will see is not, it's not immediately known, and it's hard to predict. And if you are developing that app and it's in development, the utilization levels will not be extremely high. Therefore, to pay for only what is used is a great benefit and allows you to control your costs. And then apps that are migrating, such as a website, you may have metrics available on the amount of traffic and resources utilization to expect, and you may have a benefit to utilizing a more fixed plan for your consumption, but it's still an extremely easy way to get started. And the consumption model allows you to utilize app service plans for multiple platform services across the same pool of compute resources as well, creating additional benefit of that plan overall and how you're utilizing that plan. Then, as we had stated previously, platform services run on highly available compute resources, and many of these resources have built-in auto-scaling features that can decrease overall operations expenses for dynamic applications during slower periods of use. And something that is really key to managing platform services is the ability to monitor the usage of these services closely, because there's a potential that for spending to really increase quickly if traffic does spike at a high level. So governance over these services through the alerting tools within Azure can assist in avoiding spikes in cost, to setting alerts when spending gets to a certain degree, and evaluate whether you need to go from the consumption-based model to a more fixed subscription and service plan within your app services. Platform services are great for applications that run on code as well. So many developers were early adopters within cloud and utilized cloud. And the reason they did that was because they could easily launch a service that is updated and ready to write and deploy and test without the management overhead of an operating system. As we continue to talk, it gave developers that did not understand infrastructure technologies and virtual machines and operating systems the means to create their code and run their code and get their application tested on a very fast basis. And as we begin to transform more applications to being that cloud native, this becomes a benefit that organizations can further leverage. And the important thing to note here around fast deployment and everything is that it is much different in migrating an application to a platform service than it is to a infrastructure service, because they are not that lift and shift where you can take a virtual machine image, with the application built in on it, and copy that image to a platform service. Not all applications are suited for use on platform services. Since there is no access to the operating system in platform services, if an application requires the operating system to execute a .exe type file, there is not the ability to do that. It needs to run on some level of code like .NET or C# or Python and those type of things to run and to create those applications within the platform environments. And that's where we start talking about how applications become transformed to cloud native before we can actually take that step into utilizing platform services. Security, which is always a big topic to discuss, and one that needs to be taken into account at this level within the platform services as well. And you can see on the slide, I've noted that Microsoft does handle all the hypervisor and operating system patches. It handles physical security of the data center and access to switches and the hosts and things like that. It also handles all of the operating system antivirus and anti-malware. So what are we responsible for from a security environment? And you're responsible for managing the network access, control, as I've said multiple times already, controlling the role-based access of the users and groups and services, making sure that the principles of least privilege are taken care of, are adhered to properly, and then protecting the data and the devices that are accessing the information and the data to make sure there is no exposure of your information to bad actors. And the way to do that is through building defense in depth at all levels that can protect your organization from attacks. And because of what Microsoft is required for, they're taking a few of those levels off of your hands. So putting a much deeper focus on the areas of identity and data protection and network access becomes something that, as an organization, you really should put a hyper focus on. And key areas to monitor closely as you transform those applications to platform services is to make sure to test and secure all of your application APIs, making sure that you're not exposing any keys to public to the public from your application, and make sure any development or management ports that were opened are closed to avoid any backdoors to any system. So those are, those are some key things to warn yourself on and to concern yourself with when you're looking at securing those platform services and looking and watching and avoiding the exposure of data and your application and them using your application as a means to get into your environment and do damage. So getting started with platform services, and this is another great Dilbert one. How are we, and this kind of sums up a little bit of what we've already been talking about, architecting an app to be cloud native. And, a lot of people in management may not understand what that entails and how that becomes a task that is very hard to conceive in. Why can't you just lift and shift and put them up, put my application in containers, and then just management throwing out, they read something about Kubernetes out there, so it's can't just solve your problems by throwing out platform terms and utilizing those platform terms. So let's talk about some of those services and what you might think about as you look at Azure services and how you would utilize some of those Azure services within, that are considered platform services. And as Dilbert eloquently mentioned and showed, container services and Kubernetes are really becoming that buzzword and the poster child for cloud transformation. Many organizations have a misconception about moving to platform services, especially as it pertains to containers. And containers are becoming one of the more popular services within cloud infrastructure because of the level of orchestration that can be performed and the auto scaling functions that is inherent to those services. And the big one is Azure Kubernetes service. Most of the big cloud providers have some form or function of Kubernetes. Microsoft, it's no different. They do have their own Kubernetes service, and is what Azure utilizes as their primary service for containers. And the nice thing about Kubernetes is it is a service. It is a container service that is utilized by all the big cloud service providers. So therefore, organizations have the ability to utilize this service and avoid vendor lock-in with their applications as well. And if you have an application that is cloud native that can run above the operating system utilizing code, then AKS would be beneficial to leverage in your cloud transformation. The other one to consider within the Azure environment is Azure Container Instance. And what that is, that differentiates itself. It's Azure's native container service as well, and it's more of an isolated container. It's good for simple applications, or if you're simply just testing an application to see how it runs on a cloud native environment. You don't want to move it to a full Kubernetes service yet, and you're just testing it for a short amount of time. There are some use cases for that. Most organizations are taking their cloud native type applications to that Kubernetes service though. I've mentioned app services and app service agreements a little bit as we've gone through, and if you are looking to jump into platform services within Azure, using Azure App Services is a great way to start because it utilizes familiar code languages. You can support Windows and Linux type applications. It is again an auto scaling environment, but the nice thing is it's a great way to jump into and be utilized by web developers and to potentially host your website and jump right into utilizing platform services. If you're hosting a website within your own environment currently, this takes you out of the hardware requirements of maintaining a website, maintaining that that website can handle your traffic by putting in an app service that is going to auto scale for you based on the utilization. So if you have, especially if you're running an e-commerce type site, app services would be a great way to start. And it provides then the ability to have that resilient platform, and since web services are written a lot of times in like .NET or PHP or Java, you can very easily take that code and move it right into a web app, a containerized environment utilizing app services. The next couple of slides are going to talk about some services that are helpful for workflows and automation within your organization. And Azure Functions is the first of these services that I'll discuss. And we won't spend a lot of time on this slide, except to mention that this service can be used to move you in the direction of writing code to execute workflows. Again, this uses familiar languages like C# or Java, JavaScript, as well as PowerShell, where you can write code that creates and then can utilize other services within Azure that is the trigger to initiate that code and initiate that workflow. And it's very easy to do a search on GitHub to find different pre-configured Azure functions that can help to facilitate creating that workflow and utilizing triggers on other services such as Cosmos DB or storage accounts or events within Event Grid, Event Hub, or IoT Hub to take that data and then trigger some sort of workflow or function on how that data is going to be presented. I see. I do have a question here that I'll address in terms of does it support our language? I know that no Azure Functions. I'm not sure if this was Azure Functions or you put it for Azure App Services. They do not support our language that I'm familiar with. I know that I believe Cosmos DB does within the Azure environment, but I do not believe that Azure Functions does. I think I captured all the languages that are currently supported. They have added some across the way, so there might be a time that that language may be supported as well. Logic Apps is very similar to Azure Functions in which it takes a trigger and does a workflow. The nice thing about Logic Apps is it is a graphical workflow within Azure where you set up your Logic app and it will, and when you create your workflow, it's created using a graphical designer. So it's very intuitive and very easy to create your workflow. If anybody's ever used on your smartphone, the if this then that application, Logic Apps works very similar to that. You have the if this happens, then we're going to do this, and then we might do that, and you can drag and drop different things in there within the Logic app. So very easy to create a workflow where you can, where if a certain CPU utilization hits a certain amount, that it triggers a workflow to restart that virtual machine and maybe email the users and things like that. So you can do a lot of things around Logic Apps that help you to, again, reason mentioned in some of these services is how do you find your way into utilizing platform services in Azure rather than, and in an easy manner and get yourself comfortable before you start rewriting code and things like that. The next couple slides, we're going to talk about platform databases within the Azure environment. And most organizations have some kind of database that they are utilizing for potentially customer CRM, for sales, for inventory, and different ways that they're utilizing databases to present information in a structured or semi-structured manner to applications on the back end. Since Microsoft is the owner of SQL, they also have a fully managed platform of SQL within Azure that provides high availability of this service along with built-in SQL upgrades, updates, patching, automated backups, and monitoring. So they have all of these things built into a highly available environment. You can see it's 4 nines availability SLA within this SQL platform, and it allows you to move into to utilizing SQL from what you're utilizing in terms of your data within there, or your processing power. Those are the two different purchasing models you have within this fully managed SQL environment. And if you have a database that's running on SQL and you haven't done a whole lot of database and software customizations that may be affected in moving them to a platform service, that you can't do those type of customizations, then this is a great step to taking the utilization of platform services and probably decreasing your cost and management overhead quite a bit, because of the management and the cost involved in running SQL servers within your own data center could be a fairly large cost, and this takes that off of your plate and allows you to focus on strictly the overarching database and the data that's within that database. Cosmos DB, if you have a global organization, Cosmos DB is a great option to move your database into another cloud platform service. And Cosmos DB has multiple APIs, even if you're running a SQL environment, as well as MongoDB or Gremlin. There are APIs that can pull that data and utilize Cosmos DB as your primary database, and then provides an incredibly high level of availability on reads and writes on a global basis. So there are instances of Cosmos DB in regions worldwide, so it scales and allows that throughput on a worldwide level utilizing the Azure backbone. And then where a lot of your cost lies is in what you're going to set your consistency levels to, and you have different options for that based on what perceived latency you can bear within your organization. So, which would essentially be the bandwidth in your backbone that you're going to essentially consume within the Azure environment. If you have near real-time requirements on a database, on a 24/7 basis, then you need to look probably at the strong or the boundless stateless type access. If data is not being written and read on a fast and immediate need type basis, then you might look at the eventual or consistent prefix, and then the session kind of falls right in the middle. And it's very easy, if you go into the Azure services, to look at Cosmos DB and take a look at what each of these consistency levels look like. They give you kind of a treble clef that shows you based on beats how close those beats are for each of the reads and writes. And as we've talked about some of the more popular platform services, there are also a whole list of other platform-based microservices available in Azure, and these are a few popular ones that we've mentioned a couple of them already, and these are again all code-based, web consumable type services. Some of them, especially when you get into some of the cognitive services, almost look like a SaaS-based service, and that's where again, the gray area sometimes between infrastructure services and SaaS services, or where platform services kind of fall right in the middle, make it a little bit more confusing around what are PaaS services. But ultimately, these microservices are those code-based services that have no interaction with an operating system and can be combined into app services plans used on a consumption-based billing method, which provides a lot of organizational flexibility. And integrating these services within your overall Azure cloud and hybrid ecosystem adds automation and transformation for other connected services and how you're transforming and visualizing and utilizing your data. For example, IoT Hub can be used to gather streaming telemetry data from connected thermostats, for example, throughout your organization, and then feed that into an Azure function or a Logic app to alert maintenance if there's a failure on that device, or that device is running hot, or to adjust temperature settings if the thermostat reading is too high in the building, and things like that. Cognitive services, everybody understands and has become increasingly increasingly interactive to how we utilize automated bots, and what we can utilize in terms of these bots for level 1 customer services duties that are integrated into websites and service management systems like ServiceNow, and into Teams and things like that. And the list goes on, and how bots can be utilized. And as the cloud continues to evolve, more of these PaaS microservices will continue to become available within the Azure environment. So as we conclude here, let's talk about what our next steps are into cloud transformation. And as we move further into utilizing platform services, now we start to begin to bring in how we're now becoming a developer type company, and we're utilizing DevOps as a strategy within our application environment. And with DevOps, what we're talking about now is how we're doing continuous integration and continuous deployment of our applications. We're no longer reliant upon servers as our environment. We're now talking about our application delivery and what we are doing to transform our data, to transform our applications for business continuity, for availability to our user environment, whether it's our internal user environment or our external user environment, and how we're then continually taking a process to improve and test and then release and monitor these applications throughout our lifespan of this application, rather than just buying an off-the-shelf application and loading it onto a server, and then it runs until it no longer is viable, and then we purchase a new system. Now we can develop those applications that can continually improve and evolve as our organization evolves. And that's really where taking the reliance off of operating systems and the compute resources, utilizing a PaaS service really benefit you as an organization, where it really helps to take your organization to that next level. And that's really what, where we can really hopefully look at platform services and evaluate how we're doing business today to utilize more platform services tomorrow. So in summary, we talked about the cloud services and hopefully got everybody to take into account and understand more about where platform services fall in the overall cloud ecosystem and what the terminology is. And again, I stated multiple times, if you're an infrastructure, if you're coming from an infrastructure environment and virtual machines and servers and that type of environment, it's don't it's easy to forget that that platform services and they do run on those virtual machines in the background. They run on operating systems for the most part. Many of them do. As we said with SQL, SQL platform services still is a SQL server, but it is utilizing those services on a much larger scale. And Microsoft Azure is providing those compute resources and that operating system level, the layer, to everybody right off the top, and allowing those users to, allowing application developers then to focus on the transformation and how applications are going to run without worrying about the overhead of security updates on operating systems and making sure that the operating system maintains the currently supported level and things of that nature. So that, for the most part, gets us to the end of this presentation. So, thanks for attending this expert talk on platform services. Again, my name is Dwayne Natwick. If anybody has any questions, you feel free to ask, take yourself off mute and ask, or feel free to post it on the chat. Okay, it doesn't seem like we have any questions. Hopefully everybody has gained some valuable knowledge on platform services and how we can utilize them in the future and how we can protect and secure and evolve and transform our organizations going forward. So again, my name is Dwayne Natwick, and thank you very much for your time today. Have a great day.